Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Braavos 2094 AC. Roble. The strange dreams had continued for most of the trip. Not every night, but almost. In some, he was walking around the city, chasing after Winterfell, while in others, he was in the woods, hunting, stalking prey, moving through the undergrowth. Robb put it down to this being his first time sailing, his first time leaving the north. He put it down to missing White Harbor and Winterfell, both of which he found to be true. Arriving at the city, he stared in awe as they sailed under the Titan, the sheer size of the massive statue more than he could comprehend. How had they built such a thing, he wondered. He actually fell over a moment later, so surprised was he when he saw a man's face come out from a hole in the thing. I felt the same way, lad. Certain I was imagining it, Sir Wendell said as Robb got back to his feet. There are men in there? He asked, looking up and unable to see where the man had come from. Aye, lad. Should anyone attack, it'd be more than heads you'd see coming from those holes. Sir Wendell said and pointed out the gaps to Robb. Up there, archers, oil, rocks, you name it, all ready to rain down on anyone stupid enough to attack the free city. Robb smiled. The idea of a ship coming in to attack this city and finding out the statue wasn't just a statue, he could picture the stunned look on their faces when they realized the truth. Pretty soon, they came into the docks itself. Sir Wendell pointed out the different ships, strange vessels from Eben and Et, carracks from Dorne and some more pinnacle ships from the west, these ones bearing the Lannister colors. What's that? Robb said, pointing to a longship. Ironborn, Sir Wendell said, spitting on the deck. Why do you hate the Ironborn, Sarah? He asked curiously. For years, lad, they've preyed on the north. My family has suffered their attacks. I've lost kin to them, lost men I've known for years. Speak to the Mormonts and the Karstarks, and they'll tell you the same. Never trust a Reaver. Robb, never, Sir Wendell said, as he turned to talk to some of their guards. Robb looked closer to the ship, seeing men walking around it, not one of them smiling. They looked dirty, mean. He shuddered, thinking of Theon. Was his friend like these people? Was it these Reavers he looked up to? He remembered some of the stories Theon would tell, tales he made seem exciting, glorious even. Looking at the man now pissing off the edge of the long ship, he seemed anything but. When the men were ready, Sir Wendell ordered them to escort them through the city. Robb staring at every new sight he saw, from strangely dressed men and women to mummers performing in the street, from strange-looking birds and animals, to embarrassingly for him, as he blushed so, women showing far more of their bodies than he was used to. They reached a large building, and Robb was stunned to see both the Lion of Casterly Rock and the Merman of White Harbor were both equally represented on the door. Above the building, banners flew in the air. Some he recognized as northern houses, some he assumed were from the west. Be respectful in here, lad. Lord Cavan is a stickler for protocol, Sir Wendell said, and Robb nodded as they entered. The room they walked into was a simple hall with a door and a large table. A man sitting there with two guards, other men sitting at benches around it. Sir Wendell laughed and japed with one of them, a gray-haired man, while another went through large doors at the back. Eventually, they were brought through them also, and Robb was stunned at what he saw. The building was open to a small dock, boats sailed by filled with crates, with wood and furs. Men were moving up and down the dock, filling ships and emptying others. Impressive, is it not? Sir Wendell said, and Robb nodded in agreement. They were brought to a large solar. Outside, two guards stood, wearing Lannister red. Inside, a man sat at a desk in front of another large door, and he rose to his feet and greeted Sir Wendell warmly. You've returned, Wendell. Aye, that I have. Jadal, Lord Cavan, inside. He is Sarah. And who is this? The man said, looking to Robin. Lord Robb Stark, my father's squire. Robb, this is Jadal, our man in Braavos. Wendell said, and the man laughed before shaking his hand. Well met, Lord Robb, your first time in Braavos. Aye, my lord. No lord here. Lord Robb, you can call me Jadal, the man smiled at him. Robb Jadal, he said, and the man nodded before knocking and entering the room. A few minutes later, they were inside, and the man sitting at the desk could only be a Lannister. Robb thought his blonde hair was graying some, and his green eyes marking him as such. Sir Wendell, the man said, rising to his feet, a smirk on his face. Lord Cavan, Wendell said, and shook his hand. May I present Lord Robb Stark? he's squiring for my father, and Robb moved forward nervously. My lord, he said with a bow. Lord Robb, Kevin said seriously, seemingly looking him over. He did so for quite some time, and Robb felt himself growing very nervous. Lord Cavan said, and Robb looked worriedly to Sarah Wendell, who looked disappointed at him for something. Sarah Wendell said a moment later. Robb felt his heart racing. What had he done? What had gone wrong? He felt his palms begin to sweat, his eyes darting around the room, when suddenly both men broke out in fits of laughter. He looked from one to the other, unsure what was going on, before Lord Cavan looked to him, reaching over and mussing his hair. Far too serious, young man. You'll never fit in around here like that. Come take a seat. You both must be hungry after your journey. We'll eat lunch in here. Cavan said, and Robb breathed a sigh of relief, before looking to Wendell, who was sniggering. I don't understand, sir, he said. Your brother told us we had to play a jape on you, said you'd appreciate it, lad, Wendell said, and Robb chuckled. It seems I owe Jon some payback, Siri, he said with a grin. That's the spirit. Come, let's eat. I'm famished. Wendell said, taking his seat. He found himself struggling at times to keep up with talk between Kevin and Wendell, trading with lands he'd only just begun to read about. Cohor, Mantrace, openings in Volantis and the slave cities. Slaves! Did he hear that right? He'd need to speak more on that with Sarah Wendell. Surely they weren't involved with slaves. By the time they left and went to the manse belonging to House Manderley, it was dark, and Robb was fascinated, as the city came to a different kind of life. Over the next few days, he went to meetings, saw a trade deal being negotiated, and wrote some notes, which Sarah Wendell said were good suggestions. They ate with the Sea Lord, and Robb met a man who called himself the First Sword of Bramados Sirio Foil, and Robb was excited when Sarah Wendell organized a lesson with the man. You'll learn more in 1 hour from that man, Robb, than in a moon of training with Sarah Marlin. Sarah Wendell said, and Robb looked forward to the next day's lesson. He woke up early, broke his fast, and almost spent the entirety of the morning practicing while waiting on Sirio Foil to show up. When he did, he was immediately taken to a room indoors to spar, something he found strange. Why would we fight indoors, sir? He said, and the man looked at him like he was losing his mind. Sir, I am not one of your knights in their steel dresses. I am the First Sword of Bravos, Sirio Foil. Now, what is my name, boy? Sirio Foil. And yours? Robb Stark, he said, and the man smiled a little. Well, Robb Stark, Sirio for all will explain. Indoors, outdoors, it is all the same. Fighting comes when it comes, this I know. He then threw him a sword made of wood. Wood, he said. When you can manage that, you can have steel, not before. Now shall we dance? The man's grin surprising him. For the next 2 hours, Sirio demolished him. Every move he made was countered with ease. Every blow he hit parried. He had thought he'd improved under Sir Marlin. But fighting Sirio felt like fighting Jon all over again, and he was getting more and more annoyed as he continually lost. Dead. Sirio set his blade at his neck. Dead. At his chest this time. Really dead, he set his blade at his head. In some ways, he felt glad they were using wooden swords. Had they been using steel, he'd have no doubt the pains he'd feel on the morrow would hurt even more. I'm tired, he said finally, having enough. Good. Tired is when the fighting happens. I don't want to do this anymore. Will you say that when the god of death comes knocking, Robb Stark? Tell death you are tired and don't want to do this anymore. No, there's only one thing we say to death. Sirio said, picking up the sword and looking him in the eye. Not today. Pentas 2094 AC. Dany. They had spent almost a week watching the Fat Magister's house. When she finally saw him, they wheeled him out in some contraption, and she felt her breath still. Her brother was alive. She almost instinctively jumped from the hill they sat on, almost ran to him. But she saw Sandor smile when before he got the chance to, she stopped herself. Instead, she looked closer, seeing the Fat Magister bow to her brother. It seems cunts live too, Sandor said, and despite herself, she laughed. What's going on with them, do you think? Fucked if I know. You were the one who spent time with your cunt of a brother. What usually happened when you stayed with one of these rich fuckers? Sandor said, throwing the apple he'd been eating away. They would parade us, make it seem like we were important, their friends, but it was to entertain them. Then when Westeros would get entitled, they'd throw us out. Cunts, Sandor said. Like that fat cunt there, she said, pointing at Elio, and Sandor laughed. Aye, like him? They watched as Varys had berated some servants. No, not servants. She had found out they were slaves, though none were called such. She saw Sandor jump up when some riders arrived, looking at them carefully. She didn't recognize them, but Sandor did and smirked. "Who are they?" "They're one of the groups that were looking for us, the one that attacked when we met. See the two at the end, that's the leader, I think." She looked carefully at them. While she, like Sandor, didn't care they had gotten away, seeing her brother in the chair, seeing they had been the ones to put him there, something inside her demanded revenge, justice. "I want them dead," she said, and Sandor looked at her and nodded. "As you command, princess." "I want to help," she said, and he just nodded again. Leaving the hill, they made their war back to their own small house. They had decided to rent somewhere rather than stay in the tavern, as she was keen to find out just exactly why this fat man seemed so interested in her. Now, seeing Viserys there, she was even more eager. Her feelings on her brother were already changing in her head. Sandor was right. Viserys was a cunt. She knew that now, but he was her brother still. So she'd free him from whatever the Magister's plans were, then send him on his way. She was glad he was alive. But she knew what he was like, and it seemed even being hurt hadn't changed him. Once they arrived back, she sighed. It was her turn to cook, and while she enjoyed it, found it fun to do, actually, she wasn't in the humor for it. Still, she persevered. The meat cooked just right, the vegetables she didn't really care for, but surprisingly Sandor insisted she ate them. "What's this?" "Dinner," she said, sitting down and beginning to eat it quickly. "This is meat." "Yeah, isn't it tasty?" she said as she licked her fingers, the meat juices sliding down her hand. Sandor grumbled before he too began eating. She smirked, enjoying seeing him grouse as he emptied his plate. He smiled, though, as he drank his wine. He'd given her a taste of it once, and she found she didn't like it at all, instead preferring water or some of the berry juice that was so popular here. Once done, he told her to nap as they'd have a busy night later, so she lay down, her dagger under her pillow, her sword laying on the small table. "Come on," he said, waking her up. And while it was dark outside, she felt she'd not slept at all. A few more moments. "Get up, you lazy sod," he said, kicking the bed, waking her up fully. She went to say it, it was on the tip of her tongue. She even began to open her mouth. "Don't even think it, Dragon Girl," Sandor said, and she went to grab her sword, but he pointed to the bow instead. Taking it and the dagger, they then made their way through the city. The tavern he brought her to, they'd visited before, but given how quickly he brought her there, he must have come looking for them already. "They're inside. You set up over there. When they see me, they'll come running." "Why don't I go in?" "It's me they're looking for," she said, and he smiled, reaching out to mess with her hair. "They'll not recognize you with that," he said. Her hair, though slightly longer now, was still dyed black, though she had done the edges of it in red. She was a dragon after all. "Right, be careful, Sandor," she said, and he nodded as she took her bow and set up. It didn't take long, he stumbled up the street, pretending to be drunk. Behind him, 4 of them came. Looking to her as he passed, she stood up and began to fire as he spun around. The first arrow killed the man instantly. Her second, she deliberately aimed for the man's leg. Sandor was already killing the 3rd man when the 4th moved behind him. She lined up her shot, hitting the man in the throat as Sandor turned to face him. "He was mine." Sandor growled. "You're too slow. I win," she said with a chuckle as they walked towards the man she'd injured earlier. "Who are you?" he said, obviously not recognizing her. "My friends call me Dany." "You can't," she said, and Sandor laughed as he dragged the man to his feet. "Careful, you don't want to anger this little dragon," Sandor said as the realization dawned on the man's face. Princess, all I was trying to do was help. I brought your brother to Illyrio." "He wants to help you," the man said, his voice cracking. "Why?" she asked. "I don't know, he just does," the man said, and she shook her head. "No, why?" she said. And he looked at her in confusion. "Princess? Why, if all you wanted was to help, did your men hurt my brother?" "It was an accident. We didn't mean to. You killed the one who did. They paid for it," the man said, looking to Sandor, who just stood there, bored. "Not all of them." The knife moved quickly in her hands, the blade going up through the man's chin. When she pulled it out, he fell to the ground. "Why the fuck did you let him talk so much? Kill him and be done." "That was the plan," Sandor said as they walked away. "Plans change." "For fuck's sake," he said, as he laughed. They woke the next morning, breaking their fast on eggs and bacon. It had been Sandor's turn to cook, and so she just packed her things while he did so. Once they were finished, they grabbed everything they owned and left the small house. Walking through the city, she caught Sandor staring at a large ship. She had never seen anything like it before. A part of her wanted to go over and take a closer look, but they had things to do. Arriving at the manse, she saw the slave soldiers standing there with their spears. She looked to Sandor, who spoke to the man, and then they waited. A few minutes later, they were brought inside. One of the men went to take their arms, but she shook her head, and so, instead, more guards came to escort them in. Eventually, the man waddled into the room, his belly shaking as he moved. He looked at her in confusion, but seemingly recognized Sandor. "Magister Maupates?" she asked, as if she didn't already know. "I am, and you are." "Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, Princess of Westeros. I believe you've been looking for me and my friend," she said, and the fat man smiled. "Essos, the Jaime 2094 AC. Jon Connington." Knowing that Westeros was presently recovering in Illyria's manse was creating a large headache for him. On one hand, he was his prince's brother, his king's uncle. On the other, he was a threat. Illyria told him that Westeros informed him of being crowned by his mother. This, along with the thoughts in the boy's head that he was the last dragon, would prove difficult, especially once he found out about Aegon. With Aegon demanding to meet his uncle too. Jon was in a quandary. Illyrio had his own plans for Viserys, and while Jon may not agree with them, they did at least create opportunities. When Illyrio had told him he had been furious, the sheer disgust he felt at the idea, but the more he thought on it, the more he began to realize that perhaps it'd be for the best. "What do you mean she crowned him?" "His mother crowned him when Rhaegar fell. He also said some nonsense about Rhaegar removing Rhaegar from the line of succession, that he was the true dragon." Illyrio said while eating a large piece of meat. "Did he?" Jon asked. "What?" the fat man answered, his attention having been diverted when the new dishes arrived. "Did Axe remove Rhaegar?" Jon asked. If his line was struck, then Aegon's place in it became even more problematic. He shouted it from the throne, every so often shouted it among the many things he would shout. "Varys would tell me." Illyrio said, and Jon was surprised both by the apparent sadness in the man's voice mentioning Varys, and more so that he stopped eating for a moment, though it was only a moment. "Did he write it? Did he send the letters?" Jon asked, frustrated. No, he did not. So, like many of the things the Mad King said, "They're just words in the wind, Griff." Jon breathed a sigh of relief, before wondering what they would do with Viserys, how they would handle him. "What is your plan?" "Illyrio." "Griff, I have many plans." Illyrio laughed, before reaching out and grabbing the newly brought roast duckling and biting into it. "Illyrio. Viserys, what is your plan with Viserys?" he said, his temper fraying. "He will die, Jon. The only question is when," Illyrio said, drinking some wine. He felt it deep inside. This was wrong, wasn't it? Wasn't his job to protect Rhaegar's kin? Isn't that what he should do here? But the voice he listened to most was the one which said Viserys was at threat. He was too much like his father, that it was Daenerys they needed anyway. A Zakon would understand Jon felt. In fact, if used right, it could inspire him. How? "I've not decided yet. He lives until we find his sister. After that, I'll find a way that benefits us the most." "And young Griff?" he asked, and Illyrio smiled. "We'll never know the truth of things." So as he shook the thoughts from his head, as he watched Duck and Aegon spar on deck, as Septa Lemore read her books and Haldan read his own, he mentally prepared to deny Aegon the right to see his uncle. The story was simple. It was too dangerous. The usurper's men were too close, the risk to his life, his uncle's life, too great. He smiled as Aegon got a hit in on Duck. Seeing the small grin on his face was like an arrow straight to his heart. "My prince. My silver prince. Did you see, Griff? Did you see?" Aegon said, smiling more, as he moved to him and the image was gone. The smile was different, forcing him to shake his head. "I saw. You keep getting better. Soon you'll be taking victories, is that not right, Duck?" "It is. He improves every time we fight. It'll only be a matter of time now," Duck said, placing the swords back where they belong. "Come, we must speak," he said to Axel Jagen, and led him down to their cabin. "Is it about my uncle? Can we go visit? Will it be soon, Griff?" the boy said excitedly, eager no doubt to meet his kin. "It is. Come, Aegon," Jon said, and a few moments later they were in their cabin. Aegon sitting facing him while he poured himself another glass of wine. "We cannot go, Aegon. We cannot. I know you wish to meet your uncle. I do too. But for now, we cannot. He is my uncle. He and my aunt are the only family I have left, Jon." Aegon said, and Jon felt his heart break. Was he not family? Was the boy not a son to him? You will always have family, Aegon, but for now your safety must take precedence over your wishes. I am the King Jon. I order you to take me to my uncle. I want to go now. No, Jon said, and Aegon glared at him. You can't tell me no. I'm the king. Aegon said. And Jon shook his head. That is true, and when you reach your majority, no one can tell you. No. But we are not there yet. Aegon, you may be king, but I act as your regent. It is the law of the land you will one day rule. You must understand. That, he said, and watched as Aegon deflated. I know, I wish to see my family, Jon. Aegon said as the tears began to fall. He held him in his arms, feeling the boy sob against his shoulders. It broke his heart to deny him, and should Daenerys have been there with her brother, he didn't think he'd have been able to, but she was the true prize, the true dragon. With her and Aegon together, with them joined, the loyalists would rally to their cause. A good king and queen, that's what the realm would need, and he had no doubts in at least one of those being true. When the boy had calmed some, Jon smiled as Aegon wiped his eyes, embarrassed he had cried in front of him. He looked at Aegon, who attempted a smile, and saw him there once again. His silver prince, his life. They sat down to dinner that night, Aegon and Duck laughing and joking. Lemore speaking to Halden while they ate and laughed. Jon found himself drawn more and more to the wine. He drank far more than he should, but he thought he should be drunk, thought he should be happy. Though tonight he found it hard to be either. The voice in his head started out as a whisper, but soon it rose, and so he walked from the room, before almost stumbling on his hands and knees to the deck. You were never my friend. You were never my friend. My blood, Jon, they are my blood. He shook his head as he threw up. He was always his friend, his closest friend, his confidant, his truest and most loyal man. He would put his son on the throne, no matter what it took. That would prove it. That would show him. That would quieten the voices in his head. Would it not? My silver prince. My life. My love. Pentos 2094. Illyrio. When the guard came in and told him who was at his gate, he could barely believe it. A lie. It must be. There was no way it would be this easy, no way she'd just come to him. After the amount of coin he'd spent to find her, the number of men her dog had cut down, that they would both just arrive at his gate, both just walk into his home. No, it couldn't be that easy. But it turned out it could, though the girl in front of him was far different than he expected. Her hair was just below her neck, black with red tinged edges, the colors of her house. She wore a sword, carried a dagger, her clothing more suited to a boy than a girl. Were it not for her eyes, and the man, whither he'd have sent her away, laughed at her mummery. The hound, though, was every bit as imposing as he had heard, almost 7 feet tall, his burned face marking him clearly. His eyes were everywhere. Illyrio had over 30 unsullied as his guards, yet as he looked at the man, he knew that while it would be enough, he was still not safe. So he would need to be clever to judge when and where to dispose of this man. When and where it would be the best time, for it was clear it wasn't now. Princess, it is good to see you. Please, you and your companion should sit. You wish for food, for drink. I shall have it brought to you immediately, he said, rising to his feet and moving to the door as they sat down. Master, one of the Lazini girls said as he walked from the room. Food, drink for my guests? Now? Move, girl, he said, and she scurried off to do his bidding. He walked looking for his steward, and finding him working in his solar, calling the man to him, he ordered him to ensure Viserys didn't leave his room. He was to be guarded until he told him otherwise. Once he was gone, he called for Red Ant, the captain of his guards. When the Unsullied arrived, he told him to make sure all the guards were on duty, and then headed back to the room. The princess was sitting there, neither she nor the hound eating, both looking around the room, and he watched her for a moment. The girl's eyes were predatory, fierce. She looked like a lioness wary in her surroundings. No, not a lioness. A dragon. He smiled as he entered the room. Aegon would do well with this girl as his queen. Well indeed. Forgive me, my princess. I had things which needed my attention, he said, smiling, even more now as he took his seat. More than I magister. I find it surprising given how much effort you put into finding me, she said, her eyes on his. Indeed, it is true. I wish to find you most urgently, my princess. Once I heard of where you were, I sent my men. Why did you not come with them? He asked, without looking at the main reason. Who sat beside her? People have been trying to kill me and my brother from the moment I was born. Magister, they succeeded with Viserys, she said sadly, tears falling from her eyes, and he couldn't help but smile inside. I will make sure they do not with me, she said, wiping her eyes. I have no wish to see you harmed, princess. Far from it. It is your safety I seek to ensure, he said, and she looked at him, her eyes full of hope. It is! Of course, princess. You and your brothers. Then you failed in that, since it was your men who killed him, the hound said angrily. The princess's brother is very much alive, Sandor Clegane, he said smiling when the hound seemed taken aback that he knew him. My brother lives, take me to him, take me to him. I need to see him, the princess said, and he was pleased that her voice, which started out firm, tailed off into desperation. He rests now, princess. It wouldn't do to wake him, but I can have you shown to him if you like. Yes, please, Magister. I would like that very much, she said, and he nodded to one of the Lightsley slaves to go and bring his steward to him. The hound looked at him suspiciously, but it was the princess he was paying attention to. Hearing of her brother's survival had perked her up. Gone was the fierce dragon, and in its place a quiet, hopeful girl. He could use both, but it was good to see the dragon was just a front, just a facade. He couldn't have her be too much of a dragon, or else his own black one would be overshadowed. He smiled when she ate. When the hound did too. This he could work with. The man would have to go, there was no doubt of that, but he had time to bring the princess even closer to him before then. Maybe when she learned the truth of who Clegane was, it would work to his advantage. He could perhaps have the princess send the man away of her own volition. He had hoped his mentioning of the name would work, but the princess seemed distracted. Still, it meant she didn't know who the hound was truly, which was a boon to him. After a few moments, his steward walked to the room, and he, the princess, and the hound walked to Viserys' room. The prince slept, the drops he had placed in his food working their magic. Without them, he ranted and raved and was far too troublesome. Your brother, princess, he said as she ran to the bed, holding his hand, crying more tears. Thank you, Magister. Thank you. I am in your debt. Think nothing of it, princess. I am always happy to serve the rightful heirs of Westeros, he said. His smile genuine now as he thought of Aegon. Pentos 2094 AC. Oberyn. Bringing Dorne on side was far easier than he had expected. His brother was far more calculating than he, but his sister's letter had won him over immediately. It had obviously done the same for his brother. They had spent another 2 days in the Water Gardens. Tyrion reading through the Maester's journal, while he took his pleasure a different way. You will talk Calicut. Before I send you to whatever it is you people believe in, you will talk. You think you scare me, little snake? I'm part of something far bigger. Far more dangerous than you slippery sliding things, the Maester said, spitting. Do you know why I'm called the Red Viper? Oberyn said as he began coating his blades in the different poisons he had brought. Ah, poisons. You think in your short time at our order, we allowed you to study the truth? The Maester said cockily. What makes you think I learned there, Maester? He said as the man's expression changed. The last poison he gave him was the worst, his own concoction. Between the long goodbye and tears of lies, he had found a way to draw the death out, to draw the pain out, and he knew Calicut would live for quite some time. If he closed his eyes, he could imagine the man's screams from here. He could almost hear them. You look happy, my love, Ellaria said from beside him, the girl's naked body wrapped around her own. I am my love, very much so, he said, kissing her. He got up and walked to grab a drink, moving the boy to one side. They had arrived the week before, and Tyrion had gone to spend more time poring over the journal, while he and Illyria had come to the brothel they knew best. The boy was from Yulti, the girl he knew not where, but the night had led to no rest for Oberyn, and now he found his body ached. He needed a spar. Dressing, he walked outside. Daemon and Obar were speaking to each other, his guards ready to leave whenever he was. Daemon, escort Illyria back when she's ready. Come. Obara, I find myself longing to use my spear, he said, and his daughter smiled as they left and began walking down the streets. Pentos was not one of his favorite places. Lies the great grass sea. Norvos, Qohor. Volantis, all of them he liked better than here. Braavos was one of the greatest cities in the world in Oberyn's eyes. But this place was dull. It was boring, and he hoped they would not need to be here too long. When they made it to the tavern, he and Obara went to their rooms, returning outside a few moments later with their spears. Ready, father? Obara said, her face full of determination. Always, daughter, he said as he twirled his spear. They moved together, his influence is clear. Obara had improved, though her rashness was still a problem. It was good to be rash in a fight sometimes. Good to think on your feet, to be explosive. But it was better to think it out beforehand, to have a plan, a counter, to be ready to adapt if necessary, but to make people fight your fight when possible. One day Obara may learn that, but not today. And so instead Oberyn taught her the other lesson, the harsher one. He taught her what not learning could lead to. He taught her about pain. Humiliation didn't work on Obara. Pain did. She needed to feel the results of her recklessness, feel the consequences for it, so he struck her repeatedly, never fully bringing the stroke home, but enough for the winces to become clear, enough for her to understand. "We are done," he said as he took her feet from under her. "No, we can go again, father." "Obara, we are done. Come sit with me," he said, sending a girl to grab some drinks from them both. "What did you learn, my child?" he asked as they sipped the wine. "Not to fight you early in the morning, father," she said with a chuckle as she rubbed her arm. "What else?" he said, though he laughed with her. "That I need to slow down, to back off, to bring my opponent to me more. Then and only then should I strike." She said, looking to him eagerly, and he smiled, a true smile. "Then and only then," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. He smirked when she wiped it off, her face making it look as if the affection unnerved her. But he saw the small smile when he turned away. "You left me there," he heard Ilaria say a few moments later, as she walked towards him, his paramour pretending to be hurt. "You look so happy, my love. Besides, that was hours ago. You must have found a way to keep you occupied," he said, and she rolled her eyes. "It was supposed to keep us occupied. Oberyn." They walked into the tavern to find Tyrion breaking his fast. Joining him, they all began to eat, while Tyrion sat quietly. "You find out anything?" he asked, and Tyrion shook his head. "Your maester was a dull man," Tyrion replied, and he nodded. "So, no new names." "One or two odd choices, though," Tyrion said, and he looked at him. "In what way?" "Small houses, Blackwoods and Brackens in the Riverlands, Waynwood in the Vale, and some names I know not." "Which names?" "Otar and Cates," Tyrion said, and Oberyn shook his head. "Never hearing of the men. We should ask Maren and House Waynwood. I do not know, but Blackwoods and the Brackens both share blood with the dragons, do they not?" "They do? Wait, Otar Cates, they aren't with the Valerians, are they?" Tyrion said, panicked. "No, Montford's maester has been there since his father's days. He's an old man now, a Celtigar bastard, I believe, Edwell Hill." "How do you just know that?" Tyrion said, laughing. "What I know things," he said, laughing back. "I'm not just a pretty face, my friend. We need to speak to Montford, Reimagined, too. I doubt either would send messages or speak to their maesters on what they know. But still, we need to speak to them. We will, Tyrion, so any luck on finding our friend?" "No, but I did hear some interesting news," Tyrion said, moving closer to him. "Apparently one of the magisters in this city has been searching extensively for the Targaryens, offering quite a large reward, or find them and bring them to him. A man named Illyrio Mapatis." "You think we should pay the magister a visit?" Oberyn asked. "You perhaps," Tyrion said, and Illyria, who had been quietly listening, turned to them both. "Should I not go change first?" she said with the sweetest smile he could imagine. Penta's 2094 AC. The Hound, how he kept his face steady during Dany's mummery was beyond him. How she managed it was beyond him. The tears especially were a nice touch, he thought. He could see the wheels turn in the Magister's head, see how happy he was by the turn of events. Even his little attempt to get Dany to turn on him was funny to watch. Still, he had his own part to play, so he waited until Dany was safely in her room, and then asked to see the Magister. Handing up his weapons was annoying, though thankfully he had more. Dany had more, and some others were hidden close by in case they were needed. Looking at the two guards who stood with him, he wondered how quick they were. He knew they'd not be bothered by his size and strength. They'd do their duty. As the Magister looked at him, as the guards nodded, he was unarmed. He saw the man relax, saw the man smile, thinking he had the advantage. "Why have you come to see me, Clegane? What are your plans for the princess?" he asked, showing his worry for the girl straight from the start. "To help her and her brother take their throne back." "Of course," the Magister said, and he looked at the smile, wondering how long it would take to remove each of his teeth. "You know who I am?" "I know a lot about you, Clegane, your brother." "Oh, I know exactly who you are." "What do you intend to do about it?" he asked, his worried voice making the man smile. That depends. What are your plans for the princess? To protect her, he said, and the Magister nodded. Why? She reminds me of someone I lost, he said, making his voice as shaky as he could. Who? It doesn't matter. Who? The Magister said, and so he told him of his sister, annoyed yet again by his smiling face. She doesn't know who I am. I don't want her to, he said, and try as he might, he couldn't get a damn tear to fall. Damn dragon girl has me beat, he thought, and laughed inside. It's an interesting predicament you find yourself in, but I sense you wish to look after the princess, and since that is my own wish, I think we can work together for now. For now, I wish to see just how trustworthy you are. Clegane, should I find you lacking, then the princess will need to know just exactly who you are. Illyrio said, and waited for his reaction. He gave the man his best panicked look, watched the smile which appeared on his face, and then got up and walked slowly to the door. Shoulders sagging, he made himself look as beat as he could. Once outside, he was given back his weapons and then escorted to his room. Laying down on the bed, he smirked. The dragon girl was far too clever for the likes of Illyrio Mopatis. We need to get in there, Sandor. With that many guards, it'll be tricky. No, it won't. He's looking for me. All we need to do is walk to the gate. Are you fucking mad? About as mad as you are, she said. And despite himself, he laughed. He'll not let me in, he said, and then before she could answer, certainly not let me stay. He will if he thinks he owns you, she said. No one fucking owns me, he said angrily. I know, she said, and her smile at least calmed him some. What I mean is men like him, from what you told me, they like to believe they own people, that people are mere tools for them. Aye, so be a tool. Give him what he needs to think he owns you. What? Half-truths. Make him think you care. Make him think you're worried you'll be sent away. If he knows the truth about who you are, make him think I don't. It had worked well, he felt, though there was still the inevitable problem to come with her cunt of a brother. He hoped she was ready for that. If not, then he hoped she would soon be. He thought to himself as he drifted off to sleep. Waking the next morning, they broke their fast, thankfully alone. The Magister then sent for him. Sitting in the room waiting for the Magister, he wondered what lie he'd be fed now. Is Sandor. She calls you this, yes, the Magister said. And he nodded. Good. His Grace the King is awake and most anxious to meet his sister. I would like you to be there. Of course. His Grace is temperamental, Sandor. He may seem a bit rough with his sister, a bit aggravated at times. Then I'll fucking gut him. No, you won't. The Magister said, his voice and expression far more serious now. I'll not let him harm her, he said, his voice softer now. He is a king and will behave as all kings do. If you wish to stay, you will accept this. No. He kept silent for a few minutes, kept his head down, before turning to look at Illyrio, and nodding, and the grin he hated was back on the fat man's face. He was brought back to Dany, and she played her part really well. The excitement she showed when she was told she could see Viserys looked completely genuine, though he knew it to be an act. They were brought down to the room and found him sitting up in a wheeled chair, dressed in the colors of his house. He smiled when he saw her, then frowned at her, and then looked angrily at him. Who is this scarred monster? Viserys said, his voice high-pitched and grating on him already. This is Sandor. He's protecting me. Dany stared proudly, and Viserys glared at her. Your hair? What did you do with your hair? You're a princess, not a whore. Viserys said, and it took everything he had to stand back while the boy pulled her hair. Please, you're hurting me. You are a Targaryen, sweet sister. Be one, or else you'll wake the dragon. I will. I'm sorry. Please, my king. I'm sorry, she said, tears falling, and he couldn't be certain they weren't genuine. Magister Illyrio will see us on our thrones, sweet sister. Thank him for me. Thank you, Magister, she said, and Viserys smiled, as did the Magister. Over the next few weeks, he watched as sometimes the prince was pleasant, almost brotherly to his sister, sometimes very much not. They couldn't get the materials to take the dye out of her hair, so it was allowed to grow longer and then cut. At the moment, it was barely a couple of inches long, but Viserys seemed pleased. The silver was showing at least. The Magister seemed more and more pleased about something or other, be it Dany seemingly reverting to the meek girl she had once been, or his own inaction, or even the prince's fawning over him. As for Viserys, well, he was a cunt, and should he ever be given permission, a dead one, though he knew she'd not allow it. It was the evening of their first moon there that the delivery happened. What it was that was in the chest, he had no idea, but Dane seemed eager to find out, the girl almost chasing after it when it arrived. He watched as it was locked in a room, watched as the key was handed to Illyrio and placed around his neck. It took him a few more days for Jane to send him on the errands, a few more to be allowed to do so, though even then, he was only allowed out under guard. "It's a fine evening, is it not?" he heard her voice in his room, turning to see her standing in the corner. "You shouldn't be here." "The Magister is eating yet again, and my brother is drunk. Here, can you do this?" she said, handing him the key. "Where? How?" "I was so upset when my brother hurt me today, when I woke the dragon," she said with a snort. "So upset that the Magister allowed me an embrace. Or maybe it was that I'm growing up, and he had another reason he wished to hold me in his arms," she said, shuddering. He did his best, made the imprints in the clay, and handed it back to her, trying not to think of the Magister touching her as she embraced him again. Then she was gone, and he lay down. It took him another week to get the key made, another week to get the opportunity to see if it worked. Once they were sure they would need to wait for the right time, and then they would leave this place and these people behind. Titus 24 AC. Dany. She wasn't sure which of the two was the most deluded, her brother with his visions of being crowned, of crowds chanting his name, of loyalists coming to him and swearing fealty. Illyrio filled their heads with tales of women sewing dragon banners, of men meeting in secret and drinking toasts to their name, of an army just waiting for the king to return and for them to rise up in his name, and her brother lapped it all up while she sat there and smiled pleasantly. The truth was far different, Sandor had told her of her father, of the rebellion, of the way people felt. There was no secret toasts or dragon banners, no army in waiting. All that awaited her on her return to Westeros right now was Robert Baratheon, and whatever fate he'd wish upon her, given what the man had allowed happen to her niece and nephew and their mother, it was not one she looked forward to. No, for her, the only one she could count on was Sandor, her loyal protector, her friend. It was them against the world, and the world would find out how outmatched it was soon enough. So, she played her act, bided her time, let the Magister touch her when she embraced him when he was sober, touch her more when he did so while drunk. But she had taken his key and she had put it back, and he had bought her mummery as truth, as if she could ever be worried about a broken dragon. "Come, sweet sister, sit with me. Let me tell you of our plans." Her brother hiccuped, and she smiled and nodded at the Magister, who looked at her strangely. At first she feared he had felt her put the key back, but then, as she saw him readjust his robe, she felt disgusted. He had been aroused by her, by a girl. Maybe she should let Sandor gut him and be done with it. "Tell me, brother," she said with her sweetest smile, and listened as he went on and on about wolves, lions, and stags, and the revenge he'd never be able to deliver on. The next morning she was called to the Magister's room and told they wouldn't be allowed outside for the foreseeable future. Men had come, Baratheon men, and their safety was paramount. But Dany could tell when a man was lying. It was easy when you knew what to look for, and with some, it was simply every time their lips moved, as it was with Illyrio. "As you say, Magister, I am most grateful," she said, her painted-on smile just another disguise she wore each day. "Thank you, Princess. I shall see to the men myself. I may be gone a day or two," he said, and she smiled, happy both that he was leaving and for the chance it presented. Seeing Sandor that day, she for a brief moment feared that the Magister would take him with him, that she'd be left alone. They hadn't planned much for that, other than where to meet if they got separated. Thankfully, though, he didn't, and the next day, the Magister set off, some of his guards with him making their job easier. "Your brother? What of him? What do you want to do with him?" Sandor asked in her room that night. "Nothing. Is that wise, Princess?" "Whatever he is my brother still. He can stay here. We don't need to see him again, but I'll not harm him," she said, and he looked at her before nodding. She knew, though, leaving him here after what she was going to do, she knew it would cause him trouble. But the more time she spent with him, the less of the brother he had once been was shown to her. He was even more petty, even more prone to screaming and shouting, and even more eager to hurt her. The dragon woke every day, and she had the bruising on her arms, her legs, her sides to prove it. No, he could rot here for all she cared, but she'd not harm him herself, nor allow Sandor to be sullied by it. She had gotten as friendly with the guards as anyone could get, learned who they were, what they were, and being shocked at what they went through, though it presented an opportunity too. But for now, all she could focus on was the room and the chest. "What do you think is in the chest?" she asked Sandor. "I don't know, Gold." It's not gold, whatever it is, it's far more valuable, she said, smiling, as the idea came to her. She found herself drawn to it, dreaming of it, picturing it in her mind, whatever it was she wanted it. No, she needed it, and for some reason, it needed her. The first night the dreams came was frightening to her. The voices calling to her, "Mother, find us, free us, wake us," all other sounds lost apart from the voices. A part of her feared it was the madness. The one which Sandor said took her father, the one she was sure was taking her brother. But it only happened at night or when she was near the room with the chest. So she had stolen the key, bided her time, and tonight she and Sandor would see their plan through and beg on from this place before Illyr returned. She didn't trust the man, didn't believe him, how he looked at her, how he had touched her. No, this man was not a supporter of her family. She and Sandor tried to figure out the odds, but with him here, it was so much harder. They would return one day to deal with him, and for now, just accept the opportunity they had. "Are you still asleep, Dragon Girl?" she heard Sandor say, and she smirked as she got up from her bed. "No, just a mummery. Come, let's do this," she said, grabbing her bow, her sword and dagger already tied to her hips. The steward was asleep. The wine he'd drink when the Magister was away doing its trick. Servants and guards on lessened alert, though the Unsullied, were as always, as alert as ever. Thankfully, though, Illyr worried more for his safety than theirs, and so there were just the two. One outside her room and one outside her brother's. They moved swiftly through the halls, coming to the door, the two guards half asleep outside them. Raising her bow, Sandor shook his head, walked up to them, and with a headbutt to one and an elbow to the other. Both men were soon down on the ground. She ran to him, took the key, and began to try and open the door. For the briefest of moments it wouldn't work, until finally the key turned and they stepped into the room. Sandor dragging the guards behind her. "Do you see this?" she said, and Sandor smirked, grabbing a pouch full of some precious stones. "Aye, we could take it all and never look back, if it weren't for that bloody chest you want," Sandor said, though her attention was on the chest by then, and all she heard was noise. Moving closer, she opened the chest, and what she saw inside made her and then Sandor gasp. This was a far bigger treasure than anything else in this room. Far bigger. The eggs were turned to stone, each of them on its own worth of fortune. "Well, it looks like we're rich," Sandor said, but once again her attention was elsewhere. "Mother, wake us." She reached her hand in, the black egg in the middle drawing her attention, the green and gold one too, but mainly the black. She touched it, feeling the heat, feeling the movement inside. "Mother." The voice was happy, content, and as she closed the chest and Sandor lifted it up, they moved quickly to the outside. They moved constantly the next day, not bothering to stop, not bothering to eat, just moving as far away from Pentos as they could, north and into Andalos, anywhere but here. When night fell, they made camp. After eating her meal, she found herself drawn to the chest, yet again. She took the eggs out, lay down on the ground to sleep, holding them tight to her. Within moments, she was asleep. She dreamed of fire and blood, of the roaring of dragons. She dreamed of flying. High Garden, 2094 AC. Olena! Everything had gone as well as she hoped for Margaery's name day. As well as could be expected, that is. The gifts she got were incredible. The one from Jon was especially thoughtful. Olenna had been stunned at the accuracy of the drawing. How he had managed to draw it that small was something she was amazed by. The gift Sansa had given her too was unexpected. It had taken her a few moments to realize the outline of the white wolf embroidered into the fabric. But while she had enjoyed the feast, she had also found things which annoyed her during the night also. One of them, in particular, being the arrival of Renly Baratheon. It had taken her only a moment to see it, to see why he had come. Her son, being his usual subtle self, making it all too clear. Why he had thought that she'd countenance such a thing was beyond her. Was he really that stupid? She almost laughed at the thought. Of course he was. So she sat in her solar the next morning and waited for first her son. And then the stag. She'd deal with both before moving on to the other person who had almost spoiled her enjoyment of the feast. Randyll Tarly, knowing her plans for the man's son, was the only reason she had not called him out for his attitude. The night before, the boy may be fat, he may even be craven, but how his father treated him was unacceptable. "Mother, you wish to see me," Mates said, smiling, as he walked into the room. "Take a seat, Mass," she said, her voice leaving no room for doubt that she was annoyed with him. "Mother?" he said, shakily now as he sat down. What were you thinking, Mace? Mother, he said, clueless as ever. Rosalie Baratheon, Mace, don't think I don't know you invited him. Mass? I wished for him to meet Margaery, Mother, to see her, perhaps in time. Once she was older, of course a match could be made. He is the king's brother after all, he said, looking to her. What did I tell you, Mace? We will not be looking to match Margaery to that family. Am I understood? But Mother, they are the royal family. I thought you wished a match with them. I was just trying to help. How close is Rainsley to his brother Mace, to Joffrey? He brings us no advantage whatsoever. None. Storm's End, you think I'd send Margaery to Storm's End? She asked, and he mumbled something. What did you just say? She said, glaring at him. Better than marrying my daughter to a bastard, he said, and she'd have admired how he looked at her if she wasn't so annoyed. Jon Snow is perhaps the most advantageous match any lady could have. Mace, given what that boy has already accomplished, what he could accomplish in the future, there is no one in this land more advantageous. Do you understand? She said, and he shook his head. I'll not marry my daughter to a bastard mother. I draw the line there. I'll not be moved on this, he said, and she almost laughed. She knew there was a backbone in there somewhere. She'd have never guessed this to be the hill he'd die on. Neither would I, Mace, he said, and he looked at her confused. I don't understand, he said a moment later. Indeed, but that's beside the point. I have a match in mind for Margaery, a good one I've no doubt you'll approve of. Do you believe me? She asked, and he nodded. I do, Mother. I just worried. But yes, I believe you. Then you'll not try this again? No, Mother, he said, and she smiled at him. Nor will you raise any objection to Jon Snow spending time with Margaery, will you, Mace? He once again looked at her confused. Before nodding when he got up to leave, she'd love to tell him the truth, love to be able to confide in him. Olenna knew how he'd take it. He'd be overjoyed. The idea of Rhaegar's son, the idea of Jon himself, not to mention the dragons, but it couldn't be. He'd never be able to keep it to himself. So she sighed as he left, and sat back, waiting for Renly Baratheon to come to speak to her. Something wasn't right about his arrival. Something was off, and she would get to the bottom of it. She didn't have long to wait. When he came in, she looked him up and down. His brother was a fat, drunken whoremonger, his other brother a dour, rigid man. Rinsley was charming to a point, well-dressed, he conversed well, presented well. Had it not been for his proclivities, in another life he may even have worked as a match for Margaery. But her rose would grow far stronger and rise far higher than Lady of Storm's End. He had made a request to take Loras to Squire not long after she had decided to send him to Jaime Lannister. Looking at him now, and given who Jon Snow turned out to be, she was glad she had turned it down. Now, though, she needed to find out who, apart from her idiot son, had been whispering in Rhaenys' ear, for someone surely was. My lord, please take a seat. Would you like a drink? Some refreshments? She said, as charmingly as she was in the humor to pretend to be. I thank you, my lady, but I've been well looked after. Some water, perhaps, he said. And she nodded to her servant to bring some. And once done, turned to the man. I was surprised to see you come all this way for my granddaughter's name day. My lord. Really, my lady, I would have expected Lord Mace to have informed you I was coming, he said, half a smirk on his face. He did, my lord, but I was speaking more of the fact you came at all, not on your arrival itself. The Reach and the Stormlands share borders. So, my lady, I feel we should in time seek to have a much closer relationship. As do I, my lord. It can only be beneficial for us to do so. But my granddaughter's name day feast hardly seems like something the Lord of the Stormlands would bother attending, not when we shall no doubt be having another tourney at some point in the future. Normally it would not, my lady, but I found that I had both the time and inclination, and your granddaughter is such a charming girl I have long wished to meet her. She looked at the smile on his face, the way the words rolled from his lips. Someone was definitely pulling his strings, but who? I'm most pleased you came. Perhaps we can discuss some trading opportunities between our two regions, my lord. I would very much enjoy that, my lady. However, it seems I must cut my visit short. Events force me to travel back to Storm's End. Perhaps I can have my steward draw up a proposal, or you can have your own present one. Of course, my lord, then I shall keep you no longer. I wish you a safe journey home. Lord Renly, I thank you, my lady, both for the welcome and for the opportunity to speak more in the future. I look forward to it. She was annoyed when he left. Her probing had gone nowhere. Wriothesley was not that good a player of the game. Had he been, she'd have heard of it by now. No, someone was pulling his strings. Someone sending him and Mace had played into their hands. She would need to speak to Willis. Perhaps even the Lannisters on this. But never mind, it was time for lunch, and she hoped Lady Melissa was agreeable to her plans. Highgarden 2094 AC. Sam. The library at Highgarden was so much more expansive than their own. The sheer number of books was mind-boggling. He had come here after breaking his fast, glad his father was busy sparring with Dickon and others, but he couldn't even imagine where to begin. They wouldn't stay long, another day or so, and then it would be back to Horn Hill. So the larger volumes were out. Moving through the aisles, he picked up book after book. He replaced ones he'd chosen when he found another which he was more drawn to. Books on the stars, on sailing, on metalcraft, but it was the books on history he found the most fascinating. Surprisingly to him, they had books on the Gardener Kings here. Books on the other houses of the Reach too, but it was the books on the Targaryens that he kept taking and putting back, trying to decide which one to read. "No, Fane, come back," a voice called, and he turned and gasped, moving back, as he was faced with a monster. "Please don't eat me," he said, falling to the ground. "Fane, come. Come here," the voice said, more loudly now, and the wolf moved from him. "Are you well?" the voice said. Sam looked up to see a rather tall young girl standing there, her hand in the wolf's fur, holding it back. He looked from her to the wolf and back, shook his head, and the girl looked to the wolf herself. Then, "See, Fang, that's why you shouldn't run off on your own. You've scared poor. I'm sorry, my lord, I've been rude. What's your name?" The girl asked. Samwell Tarly. "Sansa Stark, my lord." "Lady Sansa, forgive me," he said, struggling awkwardly to his feet. "No, my lord. It was my fault." "Well, Fangs," she said, looking to the wolf admonishingly. "What's that you're reading?" "A history of the conquest written by Maester Orlus," he said as she looked more closely at the book. "It's a good book. My brother read a copy just recently." "Your brother is here, my lady?" he asked, eager to meet another reader. "No, Jon is in Casterly Rock," she said, her voice a little sad. Jon Snow is your brother?" his mind making the connection more quickly now. "He is," she said, looking at him, almost daring him to say something untoward about her brother. "I met him once in Old Town, him and his wolf." "Wait, is he one too?" Is she a direwolf too?" "Aye, she is." "Sansa, there you are. I wondered where you'd gotten off to." "I see you met Sam." Margaery said from the door of the library. "Lady Margaery, forgive me. I meant no harm," he said, stumbling over his words. When he saw the rose of Highgarden. "It's quite all right, Sam, so what are you two up to?" she said, smiling, her eyebrow raised. "We were just talking about Jon," Sansa said, with a pretty smile, he thought. "And direwolves," he added, to laughs. He was surprised when Margaery took a seat and Sansa did likewise. Looking at the two of them, he didn't know if he should sit or leave. But both Fang pushing him towards the table and the girls telling him to sit left him with no choice. He was surprised how eager Lady Margaery was to speak to him, though he knew she was friends with Jon, and since they were speaking of him and Ghost, perhaps he shouldn't have been. He could have stayed there all day, he found, as both Margaery and Sansa seemed far cleverer and better read than he'd have thought. But unfortunately, a servant came and informed him his father was looking for him. So after saying his goodbyes, he made his way to the guest wing and prepared to face his father. When he got there, he was glad to see his mother waiting with him, along with Lord Willis, who he had liked when he got the chance to speak to him, which wasn't much. Samwell, it's good to see you again," Lord Willis said, and he smiled and nodded at the man. "You too, my lord." "Samwell, come take a seat. Lord Willis has some news he'd like to share with you," his mother said, while his father glowered at both he and her. "Samwell, my grandmother and your mother have been discussing your future. It seems you're more inclined to knowledge than swords. Is that true?" Lord Willis asked. He looked from his mother to his father, one nodding and smiling encouragingly, the other very much not. "I am, my lord," he said, hearing his father snort. "Perhaps, then, it is that you should base your choice on then," Lord Willis said as Sam grew more confused. "Choice, my lord. Lady Olenna has graciously offered to sponsor you to go to the Citadel, Sam, to study with the Maesters. Perhaps, should you wish to, you could become one yourself one day." His mother said, her smile beaming now. A Maester him, the Citadel, this must be a dream, right? Any minute now, he'd wake up and find he'd been hit over the head during a spar, or fallen off his horse like last time he attempted to joust. His father wouldn't go for this. Surely, he thought, looking at him, and he could see the look he gave him, proving him right. But it must be a possibility, mustn't it? Otherwise, Lord Wellis wouldn't be here, his mother wouldn't be smiling. I think I'd like that very much, he said, and his father stood up and walked from the room. I shall inform my grandmother Samwell. I'm sure she'll be most pleased, my lady Samwell, Lord Wellis said before leaving a moment later. He turned to his mother. He had to know, was this for true? Was he actually going to be allowed be a master? His father had refused him when he asked to be sent there. Said it was no place for a man and not for a son of his, but something had changed. What it was he didn't know. But he was glad of it. Mother, is this for true? It is if it's what you wish, my love, she said, and he nodded vigorously. It is, mother, it very much is, he said, and she smiled when he hugged her. That night dinner was awkward. His father made snide comments of how a real man wields sword or lance, not books. How knowledge, unless it was knowledge of fighting a battle and being a lord, was useless. Sam refused to point out that his father relied on Arden for most things, or that Jon Snow had shown just how valuable knowledge could be. His brother seemed happy for him, though whether that was because of Sam's own happiness, or because he now knew he'd be getting Horn Hill, he wasn't sure. But he decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, hoping he cared enough about him that it was the former. The next morning, he met with Lady Olenna, and while he was scared to be in the room given how frightening she usually was, he found himself more grateful than nervous for once. I hope you enjoy yourself while you're there, young man. Gather what knowledge you can. Who knows, maybe someday you can help us as we've helped you. Anything, my lady, anything I can do to thank you for this opportunity, I'd be more than eager to, he said genuinely. His father wished for him to be sent directly, but his mother wouldn't allow it. So he returned to Horn Hill and got to spend some time with his sisters, got to say a proper goodbye. A few weeks later, as the carriage left, the escort of men sent to take him to Highgarden, more show of his father's standing than any worry of dangers of the journey or for him. He looked back at his home, wondering when he'd return, thinking of the few good memories he had there, of his mother, his sisters, of Dickon before he spent all his time with their father. He found he'd missed the people, not the place. The family, not the keep, that he thought was the main difference between him and his father. His father cared for the name, for how people saw them, for Horn Hill, for their lands, but never for the family who lived there. Sam knew his father wouldn't even notice he was gone, wouldn't spare him a thought while he was at the Citadel. He found, though, that for now at least, he cared not. Casterly Rock 2094 AC, Satin. He had been given a room far better than any he had ever stayed in, eaten far better than he ever had other than when someone else bought him a meal. Even been given coin to buy clothing. But none of that compared to being trained beside the others. Seeing Loras wield a blade was incredible to him. Seeing Brienne and Cregan spar just mind-blowing. His own skills were terrible. He'd never trained, never wielded a sword. He could use a dagger he knew if needed, and seemed to have some talent with a bow. But with a blade, he felt awkward, uncomfortable, and if it wasn't for Sir Daeron and Loras, he would have walked away. But the knight was patient. He didn't shout or scream. He just showed him the way to hold it and gave him little exercises to do to get better. Loras actually took the time to spar with him using wooden swords, showed him how just crashing the sword against a training dummy would help him. In the few weeks he'd been here, he'd gone from a useless swordsman to a terrible one, to one who was average. He had still felt like he wasn't improving until Jon showed him how easy it was to train, how to learn without attacking, without defending, to simply watch and copy. Look at Loras, at Brienne. Watch their feet satin, their stances. Watch how Cregan moves. Then when you're on your own, try to match it, try to be like them. But I won't be able to be like them, he said sadly. No, but by trying, you'll end up being like you, Jon said. So he had done so in his room at night. He had stood in front of a looking glass and gone through movements, stances, twists, and turns. He'd moved forward and backward. In training afterward, he had done the same things. And surprisingly, he'd even managed to get a hit in here and there. Seeing Loras smile at him when he did so, or Jon patting him on the back, made him feel prouder than he'd known he could feel. So he began to watch more and more. Sir Daeron, Sir Walder, and Sir Jars Loras, Brienne, and Cregan, all of them had their own styles, and he copied some from each of them. But watching Jon move was unlike anything else he had ever seen. His twists and turns, his spins, how he would seem to be there and then not. It was awe-inspiring, and not just to him. How does he do that? He asked Lozi. I wish I knew, Loras said, laughing. There was no doubt Jon was ahead of them. Cregan, Loras, and Brienne were so close to each other, it was hard to know who'd win each day. But Jon could take them all. So when he sparred against him and beat him, he knew something was wrong, something was off. But Jon wasn't speaking, wasn't talking. And if he wasn't to Loras, then he certainly wouldn't to him. His other lessons were more of the educational kind, and while he could read and write and had some learning, here again he was out of his depth. The fact he had to learn with Cragen and Joy was, he would think, embarrassing if not for the fact that both were far ahead of him too. Cragen actually shouldn't even be here, but they were learning more of Westeros's houses, and on that subject he was almost as clueless as Satine, almost. A red stallion on a golden shield. Lyra asked. House Bracken? Joy said when neither he nor Cragen could answer. Tell me something interesting about their house. Lyra asked, and this time it was Cragen who answered. Aegir Rivers Bitter Steel. He was a Bracken. Cragen said, and both Joy and Lyra smiled at him. A flock of ravens on a scarlet field surrounding a black shield and a weirwood. House Blackwood, he said to everyone's surprise. Very good. Now tell me something interesting about them. Lyra said. Bloodraven, he was one of them, he said, and Joy and Cragen looked to him. He didn't tell them how he'd known this, of the old woman who lived in the Undercity and how each time he'd go there, she'd repeat that rhyme. How when a couple of boys had come to the brothel wearing the sigil, he had found it interesting enough to ask one of the acolytes about it. Instead, he welcomed that they seemed happy that he was learning and left it at that. While he didn't have page or squirely duties here, he along with Brienne and Cragen did act as squires for the three knights. Brienne, unsurprisingly, was drawn to Sir Walder and Cragen to his uncle. Satin found himself working for Sir Jars, which sometimes meant he'd get to follow him around, though he was never allowed into his quarters, nor was Brienne into Sir Walder's. Come on, Satin, you must come. Loras taking him out of the monotony of cleaning armor. Why can't someone else go with you? Brian is in lessons, Cragen is spending time with his mother, and Jon as well. Jon is... Rosiers! What? It's nothing. Come on, you know you wanna, Lord Yes said, and he laughed. He was right. Going riding would be much more fun than this. Fine, then at least you can help me finish. He smiled as Loras picked up a cloth and the breastplate and began cleaning it. In no time at all, it was done, and so they went down to the stables. He still chuckled at Loras's horse's name, Bluebell, though he did so inwardly now, as Loras hadn't been too pleased to see him so do outwardly. They mounted up, and with Loras's guards they rode out the gates of Casterly Rock. He was new to riding and was still getting comfortable doing so. He knew he was nowhere near as good as Loras was, and apparently Joy and Jon were even better, but he enjoyed it, liked it, and was glad for the opportunity to learn. They rode over some hills to a small stream before dismounting and allowing the horses to drink. He watched as Loras threw a stone over the water, saw that he seemed upset over something. What's wrong? He asked. It's Jon. I don't know, something is bothering him. He won't tell me. Won't tell anyone. I wish Marjorie was here. Your sister, why? Marjorie? Jon would tell, Lorsia, soft smile on his face. Maybe you should write to her. Tell her, he said, and Loras shook his head. Are you mad? She'd be back here as soon as she could. No, I couldn't worry her so. Is there anyone else who could speak to him? He asked, and Loras shook his head. Never mind, come, let's head back, Loras said, and he just nodded. They rode back slow, almost as if Loras wasn't too keen on going back. He had wondered about the relationship between Jon and Loras, wondered if they were like him. But no, it seemed Jon and Loras's sister were interested in each other. Where that left Loras, he had no idea. But it made him re-examine the looks he had seen Loras give Jon. If they didn't mean what he had thought, then what did they mean? Dismounting when they got back, he tried to put it out of his mind, even when Loras walked over to him and smiled at him. When he put his arm on his shoulder, he had tried to put it out of his mind. Loras had thanked him for listening, and then walked off, and for the rest of the day. Satin had tried to put it out of his mind, only to find he could not. Was Loras like him? Did Loras like him? Casterly Rock 2094 AC. Jaime Tirahi. With Tyrion away, and with Daisy's pregnancy entering an even more difficult stage, he had been far busier lately than he had ever been. Had he not, then perhaps he'd have noticed it sooner. Had he been able to have his morning spars rather than needing to stay with Daisy, perhaps he'd have noticed it sooner. Not that he felt wrong for being with his wife, but he felt annoyed with himself that he hadn't noticed his king's mood. Jon had been quiet, subdued, and Jaime had written it off as him missing Margaret. He, himself, had been similar when he and Daisy parted in the north. While Jon was perhaps still unaware of his true feeling for the girl, something Daisy disagreed with him on, he'd still miss her, still be upset she wasn't there. So he had written it off as that. It had been others who had commented on it, others who brought it to his attention, and he was annoyed with himself over that. "Have you spoken to Jon much lately?" Jenna asked. "We speak every day." "About what?" "Plans? About the ice trade, about bringing the Velaryons and Derry into our deals, about many things, Aunt." "About Jon?" she asked. "What? Does he speak to you about himself, about what's going on with him, Jaime?" "I don't understand. What's going on with him?" "I don't know, that's the point. Speak to him, China, something's bothering him." So he had tried and been blown off, told he was fine, that everything was all right, and he had accepted it, believed it, until Arthur came to him, until Melisandre came to him, until Loras came to him. Each of them telling him the same thing. Something was bothering Jon, something was upsetting him, and whatever it was he was telling none of them about it. So he had spoken to Walder, to Jor's, and even to a baron's daughter, who spent the most time around Jon and his sister, thinking it was perhaps something to do with her or the other dragon that was on his king's mind. "I'd rather not say, my lord," Cyrilla said, and immediately his concern was raised. "Why not?" I'm in his confidence somewhat. If he found out I'd been speaking on him, speaking on things he did in private, my lord, I'd rather not say," she said, shaking her head. "So Cyrilla, do you think I ask this out of curiosity?" "I'm worried about him," Loras is worried. "My aunts Sir Arthur, Walder, and Jars, we're all worried about him." "I am too, my lord." "Why?" "When he's not out sparring or with Joy or his lessons, when he's not speaking with you, my lord. In his room, he's quiet, very quiet. He barely speaks to Rhaenys when I'm there, and not at all to Legaron." "How long?" he asked, annoyed. "What? How long has he been like this?" "More than a week, my lord. I don't know exactly," Cyrilla said. "What else has he been doing?" "The candles, my lord," she said softly. "What about them?" "When I leave, he goes for them. I left some notes there and went back for them, and he was looking at them. I couldn't see, but he was looking, my lord." When she left, he walked to his room. Daisy was laying on the bed, her hand over her belly. The new maester had arrived a few days ago. James' first instinct had been to send him away, only for the man to mention his name and for Jaime to breathe a little freer. Daisy seemed to like him also, and the news he gave them had both of them excited. The babe would be born within the next moon or so. "How are you feeling?" he said, sitting down on the bed beside her. "Good for now. What's wrong?" "Jon, there's something going on with him, something he's keeping from us all. Me also." "How long?" she asked. "What?" he said, his mind drifting for a moment. "How long has he been keeping it from you?" "More than a week," he said. "Spar with him on the morrow, you know how he gets." "Spar with him," she said, and he nodded. "Do you need anything?" he said, leaning forward to kiss her. "I'm hungry," she said, blushing. "Blame it on the cub," he said, and she laughed as he left to get her some food. Highgarden 2094 AC. Willis. The girl was far smarter than he had imagined. She was naive, that was for certain, but he knew his grandmother and Marjorie would, and he could already see, had started teaching her. The first time he had walked around the gardens with her, shown her Highgarden's flower beds and plants, she had walked almost dreamily beside him. Almost lost and swooning over the beauty of his home, he could understand that, allow for that, he too knew how beautiful it was here. Now though she walked around, almost more appreciative of the labyrinth, of the way the keep seemed to be beauty first. But on closer inspection, its defensive nature was clear. When he had pointed it out to her, he had expected her to dismiss it. But she had seemed pleased they were safe here. As for her direwolf, while not as large as her brothers according to her, it was still quite large. He had tried to picture Ghost in his mind, and found that now Fang seemed to be his point of reference instead. He had been worried about the wolf and his hounds, more so about his hawks, but the wolf ignored them, seemed to have no interest, and it relaxed him some. "Did you enjoy the feast, Sansa?" he asked, and saw her frown and then smile. "I did, Willis." "Sansa?" he said, and she smirked before looking away. "Not all of it," she said. "Come, let's sit, and you can tell me of it," he said, seeing the seat in front of them. One thing he most appreciated on these walks was that, given his injured leg, Sansa seemed more than happy to sit when he suggested. It also allowed for the conversation to flow more freely, he found. "So what bothered you?" "Who said anyone bothered me?" she said, and he took note of it since it was a person rather than a particular thing. "Who was it, Sansa, perhaps? If you tell me I can ensure they don't come to the next one," he said, smiling at her when she laughed. All of them? She said, laughing some more. There was more than one. They were just being stupid, as if she'd ever. She said, huffing before putting her hand to her mouth and blushing. I'm sorry, I shouldn't assume. Gossip. You have gossip, he said, and moved closer to her. I love gossip, tell me, he whispered, and she giggled. I can't. I shouldn't. Sansa, he said and looked at her. Margaery. All those boys asking her to dance, all thinking she'd want to dance with them, as if she would. Sansa said, and Willis looked at her, wondering if that was it. Was it a simple case of jealousy? I'm sure some asked you too, he said, and she looked at him. What? Oh, they did. I don't mind them asking me, but I know Marjorie didn't wish to dance with them or listen to them speak to her. I saw it with the king's brother. Lord Rinsley. I know Marjorie didn't wish to dance with him and the others, they're just stupid boys. Marjorie doesn't like any of them, she said, and Willis was at a loss. What did she mean, stupid boys? What was she thinking? It took him a few moments to realize it, to figure it out, and when he did, he smiled. It was true then. Marjorie felt something for Jon too, just as his grandmother had said. He looked back to Sansa and then to Fang, who was sitting there watching them both carefully. Wolves, he thought to himself. Well then, we'll have to ensure they don't annoy my sister next time then, won't we? He said, and Sansa smiled broadly. A few days later, after another of their walks, he found himself summoned to his grandmother's solar, surprised to see her look so annoyed since his father was away and he was usually the cause. Garland had accompanied his father and mother to a celebration at Leonette's, and so unless something had happened there, which was unlikely, this could or at least seemed to be far more serious. Grandmother, he asked, sitting down. Read, she said, handing him a note. A trout wishes to travel among the roses, bringing news of the union of a stag and wolf. I don't understand, he said, knowing some of it, but some not making sense to him. Sansa's mother will be visiting us soon, it seems. Given that she's coming from King's Landing, she's agreed to betroth her daughter and the prince. His grandmother said, but she couldn't have, Sansa is far too young. Besides Lord Stark, he said, his voice concerned. Doesn't know I'd wager, but still, she'll fill her head with tales of the prince, us. It is up to us to fill her head with tales of the truth. How? Marguerite, we need to involve Marguerite. Would it not be better if the king spoke to her himself, grandmother? It would, but he'll do it in person. Willis, Jon wouldn't have it any other way. His grandmother said, her fondness for Jon Snow clear in her expression. What of Lady Catelyn? We'll welcome her with all the courtesy she is due. Grandmother, he said, chidingly, I'm not who Lady Catelyn should worry about here, Willis. Marjorie, he said, you think my thorns will hurt a trout? Wait and see what happens. Should she dare disparage Jon in your sister's presence? King's Landing, 2094 AC. Cat. She had almost walked on air after speaking to the king. Padir, too, seemed overjoyed for her. Sansa was to be queen. It was everything she wished for, everything she had ever hoped for. Her daughter. She wished her father had lived to see it come to be, to even know the betrothal was secured, to know that his granddaughter would be queen. He'd have been so proud of her, so proud of them both. But Jon Arryn had surprisingly been, if not against the idea, certainly trying to steer her away from the match. She had been stunned until Padir had explained it, until he had set her straight. Jon loves your husband, Cat, more so perhaps even than Robert. Then should he not be thankful, happy even for the match? She asked. Perhaps, but if we're right about Jon Snow, if we are even close to the truth about your husband, no, Plaisir, I'll not believe it. Ned would never. He may care for the boy, but I don't believe he'd plan against our own children. Why wouldn't he just announce it if that was his plan? Because your family wouldn't stand for it, Cat, and Lysa would support you too. Should he just disinherit your line, then there would be reason enough to rise against him. But should he think like a bastard? She saw it more clearly then. Robb in disfavor, something happening to Bran, and given what the bastard had done, how he'd ingratiated himself with their bannermen, yes, if that happened, then it would look right, look true. Ned could claim he had no choice. If they rose against him then, they'd look like the ones usurping, not the bastard. But still, she couldn't fathom it, couldn't even consider it. Could she? I still don't see it, Padir. Why would Jon tell me Joffrey is a monster? A cruel boy who'd treat Sansa dishonorably and hurtfully. With Sansa tied to the crown, Cat, then the bastard is no threat. How could he be, even with the Lannisters behind him? He couldn't go against the crown, and Sansa would never allow him to usurp her brother, would she? Would she, though? She seemed closer to the bastard than to Robb while he was there, happier in the bastard's company than that of her own true-born brother. She would have to speak to her, talk to her, and set her straight on the true nature of her bastard brother, of what he truly wished for. Though it had never taken before, but this time she'd be bringing her news of the prince, of her future. This time it would it not? "Thank you, Pater. I'd be lost without you," she said, and he smiled at her and kissed her cheek. It took her another few days to find out from Lysiate that everything Pater said about Jon was true. Everything she had suspected it seemed to be happening. Had she not come here, had she not realized the true depths of the bastard's plan, she shuddered thinking on it. "My husband is against this match, Cat," Lysia said, and she looked around the room before moving closer. "I believe if he could, he'd talk the king out of it. Have him marry the prince to someone else. But Robert is determined to marry Joffrey to Sansa. Why, Lysa? Why is he against it so?" "I don't know, Cat. I wish I did. All I can say is he came back from his solar the other day cursing the king for making the match." Cat felt there had to be another reason. There had to be something else going on. Surely Jon Arryn wasn't on the bastard's side. Edmure said he had been furious with him. He had wanted his hand as badly as Edmure had. Surely even his love for her husband wouldn't bring him to support the bastard after that. She couldn't make sense of it. "Admore, I don't understand. Why would he wish for this? Why would Jon be so against the match?" "Coin, Cat, coin." "Coin?" "Apparently the crown is in need of it. Perhaps Jon Arryn sees the bastard's connection to the Lannisters as a way to gain their coin. He would see my children ruined for coin. I do not know, Cat. I find it most strange that he's not happy for this. The daughter of one of his foster sons marrying the son of the other, I'd have thought him overjoyed." "What of the prince?" she asked. "A boy, Cat. We were all young once. Am I the same boy you grew up with? Are you the same girl?" "No, I'm not," she said, smiling as she thought of it. She was very different now to how she had once been. A few days before she was ready to head to Highgarden, Edmure left to go back to Riverrun. Kiara spent her time mostly with Pettier, enjoying eating with him, even dancing once, though only once. It was the next morning that she met the prince, seeing him arguing in the hall with some servants. Behind him, the Kingsguard looked incredible in his shiny armor and white cloak, but the prince in his golden doublet, his blonde hair and green eyes outshone him. He was a handsome young boy and would grow into a very handsome man. Exactly what her daughter would deserve, she thought, as she looked at him. "My prince?" she said, curtsying, when he turned to look at her. "Who are you?" he asked, looking at her oddly. "Lady Catelyn Stark, my prince." "Ah, Lady Stark, my father told me you were here." "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, kissing her offered hand. "You too, my prince," she said, smiling. "Are you still here, Begone? Go. And don't show your face around here again, or it'll be more than my boots you'll feel." Joffrey said, looking at the servant girl before turning to her. "Forgive me, my lady, but these people, they take advantage." "Of course, my prince, you are right to put them in their place," she said, and didn't notice the roll of the eyes the Kingsguard gave her. "I must beg my leave, my lady. Perhaps we can speak again," he said, and she bid him farewell. She only saw him once more before she readied to leave. He was riding his horse, looking so elegant as he sat on its back, so much like what a future king should. The horse, though, was moving erratically, and she worried so for his safety. But he hit it more than once with the whip he carried, and eventually she calmed down. Had she looked closer, she'd have seen the blood on the horse's side, seen the marks from where his spiked spurs had dug into the horse's flesh. Peter helped her into her carriage when she was ready to leave. She was actually in some ways sorry to be going, though she knew where she was heading to was important. She had to speak to Sansa, which meant her journey home would be far longer than she had expected. But thankfully Peter had sent a raven back to Winterfell for her. "Thank you, Petey, for everything," she said, smiling at him as he kissed her hand. "For you, Cat, I'd do anything. You know this." "I do, Pettier, and I'm most grateful for it," she said, as he closed the door. His man had already headed off to the west. Perhaps even by the time she got to Highgarden, it would be done, and Jon Snow would be no longer in her life. She felt relieved as the carriage took off. She would protect her family. She would ensure their future. Ensure Robb and Sansa, Bran and Arya got what they deserved, as would Jon Snow. Scasterly Rock 2094 AC. Jon? He looked at the bronze dragon angrily as he had for days on end. He refused to speak to him, refused to speak to Ratsinks. Instead, Lygaron simply said it was time, that he needed to know the truth. Who decided it was time? Why they had decided it, his dragon refused to say. Not even his sister's anger was enough. Only that it was time, that he needed to know. Rhaegar worried about him and tried to comfort him, but it was to no avail. Nothing she could say, nothing she could offer would make him feel any better about this. Just knowing this truth was like a weight he carried with him. Every day. It affected his sparring, his moods, his conversation. Every time he saw a Lannister, he wanted to run away, wanted to hide, lest they figure it out from how he looked at them. Jerry, you can't keep this to yourself. You're not eating, not sleeping right. You need to speak to someone. Rhaegar looked sad, and he looked to his sister. Who can I speak to on this? I can't tell them, Ray. I can't, not this. I can't tell them this, he said, shaking his head. Do they have to know? Can you just keep it to yourself? She asked, and he heard the bronze dragon's chirps before his sister turned on him. You have caused enough problems, you don't get an opinion on this, she said angrily to Rhaegar. He drowned out the noise as the two dragons chirped at each other. He didn't need this, didn't want this. He wished he could just wipe it from his mind. What do you mean he's your rider? Rhaegar said loudly, and Jon turned to look at both dragons. They were standing not more than a few inches from each other, face to face, Rhaegar on the table, while Rhaenys was on a chair, a bit lower than him. Jay, he says Tyrion. Tyrion is his rider, just like you are mine, she said, looking to him. I don't care. No one cares. No one will care. You think they'll give a damn about Tyrion being a dragon rider when they find this out? You think Tyrion will? He said angrily to Rhaegar while Rhaenys looked on. We could have bonded him differently. I could have claimed it in another way. Not this. Never this. Jon did what he had been doing for the last few days then, moving to the glass candles. He tried to get them to work, tried to see if there was more, if there was a reason, an excuse, an explanation. But while they'd burn for him, they'd show him nothing. Tell him nothing, leaving him with the truth of what he'd seen in his head, leaving him with knowing what it would mean should the truth be known. His days were spent in somewhat of a daze. He went to lessons and barely concentrated, went to spars or spent time with his friends, but was barely there. Knowing that Tyrion was his uncle, was his family, should have brought him some comfort, some joy. He had lost so many. To gain a new family member should have meant something, but the cost was too high, the price far too steep. He would gain an uncle. The Lannisters shouldn't need to lose a brother, a nephew, a cousin, for him to do so. Should we take the dragons out, Jon? He heard Sarella ask him, and he nodded, even though he couldn't even remember when the girl had arrived. They walked out into the cove. He carrying Rhaegar, but barely looking at the bronze dragon. Rhaenys flying ahead of him, almost too big to be carried by anyone other than Walder now. He, Arthur, and Jurs stood watching the dragons as they took to the sky, both dropping into the water, but only Rhaenys returning with a fish. Rhaegar seemingly only doing so for show. He knew, he could feel the bronze's own upset, its own concern for him, but he found it hard to forgive him, hard to come to terms with what he'd done. So he had been distant, and would stay so, refusing to allow Rhaegar to speak to him, even on the occasions the bronze had tried to. Jon could see the concern in Arthur's eyes. In Jotz's too, Walder had come right out, and asked him what was wrong, but he couldn't even begin to tell them. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. They would still eat in the family wing, still meet up and join for their meals. Saturn had become part of their group now, eating with them, training with them. Jon was glad for him as he knew it in some way made up for his own absences. Joy was really the one person he found he could be with and not pretend as much, not worry about as much. The one person who could still get a true smile from him. Jon, story. Already you haven't even had your dessert, Joy? Dessert yucky, Jon. No strawberries, she said, shaking her head annoyed. No strawberries. Why no strawberries? He said, as if the mere thought of it caused him distress. Auntie said, I was bad, Jon. No lessons, no apples, no strawberries. Joy said, shaking her head. How about we go for our story and see if we can find some strawberries along the way, he said, and she smiled broadly. No tell Auntie, Jon, she whispered and giggled. No tell Auntie, Joy, he said, and took her hand. He knew she was just trying her best to cheer him up, to make him laugh, playing her games and making up the fact she was being punished for something. He had seen her deep in conversation with Cragen, with Genna, even with Loras. A part of him felt upset. It was that clear to people, while another just loved the girl even more. Just went on with it and allowed her to raise his spirits, as she always did. It had gone on for almost 2 weeks when Jaime came to him. He had found warging into Ghost, allowed him to almost forget, Warging into birds allowed him to fly and leave his worries far behind. But they were temporary solutions at best. So when Jaime came to him and asked him to spar with him on the morrow, he agreed, and then panicked once he had left. "Jaxley, what is it?" Rhaenys asked. "Jaehaerys, he's trying to figure out what's on my mind," he said, and his sister was quiet. "Ray, perhaps it's for the best, Jack. Perhaps it's what's needed," she said, and while he agreed, it didn't make him feel better. He needed to speak to someone, talk to someone, but who? One of his Kingsguard? Loras, Melisandre, would they understand? Would they be the right people to speak to on this? He felt not. They'd listen, they'd perhaps offer him advice, but as close to them as he was, they weren't family, and he felt he needed family. He needed someone. He needed Margaery. In the end, he settled for the only other family he had here. Making his way to Cregan's rooms, he was glad his cousin was already asleep. It was his mother he needed to see, his aunt. He found her reading alone, as she did most nights. She was glad for his company, he could see that, but given what he was about to say to her, he wondered how long that would last. "Jon, what brings you here to my humble abode?" she said with a smile. "Aunt, he began, and she looked at him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Jon, come inside," she said softly, and he did. "How are you settling in Aunt?" he asked, and she smiled at him. "I prefer it here rather than in the guest wing. It's a bit of a chore going up for the lessons. But here, we don't need to hide who we are, worry about servants overhearing or someone looking in our rooms." "Someone looked in your room?" he asked, surprised and a little shocked someone would do so. "Well, no, it's more a worry, one which I don't have now," she said, and he nodded. "What's on your mind, Jon? As happy as I am, you've come to see me, you're not one for just popping in unannounced." I found out something, Aim Turret, about my grandfather. Something terrible, something horrible, and I don't know what to do with it about it. I don't know if I need to speak on it, or if I should try and bury it deep in my heart," he said, and she looked at him. "Your grandfather was a terrible man, Jon. You know this. I know you do. But perhaps you don't really know just how terrible he was. Do you know what he said when he saw your sister the first time? She smells Dornish to me. It was the same thing he said when he first met Elia, but to say it meeting his first grandchild," she said, shaking her head. "He was a little better when he met Aegon, but only a little." Did he ever try to do anything to you?" he said, his voice shaky, and he saw that she knew what he did about his grandfather's activities. Grabbing him in a hug, she held him tight. "No, Jon, he didn't. He wouldn't have dared," she said, and he felt some relief. "I saw him," he said softly. "Saw him with someone who wasn't my grandmother. Someone he forced. I don't know what to do. Don't know what to say, Aunt," he said, and was glad she wouldn't let him go. They stayed quietly like that for a few moments, neither of them speaking, and he was glad of it, glad of the silence, the not having to say more, the not needing to speak until he was ready to do so. When he did tell her everything, he saw the concern in her eyes for him, and he thanked the gods for her, for family, for having more, and for having them here when he needed them most. "I wish I could tell you what to do, Jon. Could tell you to speak on it, or bury it, but you already know, coming here, you know what you need to do, you've already decided." "It's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt him," he said, and he wasn't sure whether it was Tyrion or Jaime he was speaking of. "He's still their king, Jon. Still Jaime's brother. Were you not still Sansa's? Still Rob's and Brandon's and Arya's? Did you feel any differently, even though their mother was not your own?" she asked, and he looked to her. No, I didn't," he said. "What about when you found out the truth, Jon? When you found out who you really were? Is Sansa less your sister now? Are the others not your siblings still?" she said, and he nodded. Leaving the room later that night, he felt better. It was still bearing down on him, still a weight on his chest, but he felt better. Arriving back at his own room, he found Rhaenys and Lycaron were still awake, obviously worried about him. He spoke to them both. The bronze dragon, happy to hear his voice directed at him. He felt him in his head, felt him looking for him, and allowed the connection to be made. "I'm sorry, father, I'm sorry," the bronze said. "Why Lycaron? Who?" "The gods' father, the old gods wanted you to know. They said you needed to know." "You talked to them?" he asked, and heard Rhaenys' voice in the background asking the same thing. "I am connected to them, father. I am your connection to them," Lord Euron said. That night he found himself walking in a glade, surrounded by trees, a circle of weir woods. He felt the presence then, the power in the place. Moving around, he saw the water in the distance, looked up and saw his dragons in the sky. Rhaenys bigger than he could ever imagine, Rhaegar flying with a figure on his back. He moved to the trees, and a man walked out from behind the largest of them. He had dark green skin and horns on his head. Beside him walked a child. No, not a child. This was one of the children. He looked at the two and saw both were smiling, beckoning him forward as he began to move closer. He heard a voice boom loudly in the air. "Long have we waited for you, my prince. But now is not the time. You will come to us. We will show you the path, but not yet. Not yet." He was in a room he recognized. The throne ahead of him, standing beside it, was Tyrion dressed in black and red. To his left, a silver-haired woman wearing identical colors, and sitting on the throne itself, a dark-haired man. The scar on his face identifying him clearly, as if Jon needed such a thing to recognize himself. "The dragon must have 3 heads," Jon said as he stood up from the throne and took Tyrion and the woman's hands in his own. "Or all is lost." Riverrun 2094 AC. The Blackfish. It didn't take him long to hate this, not more than a day after his niece and nephew had left, and he was already regretting the decision he'd made. Why he'd agreed to it he knew, but he also knew nothing was worth it. Having Freys come to him, listening to them, make complaints about minor issues while also trying to push brides on him, on his nephew, even on his grandnephew, as if he could tell Ned Stark who his son should marry. All of it was tiring. Having to sit with them at dinner to entertain them, to listen to their stupid stories. That was, he had no doubt, one of the 7 hells. He knew had his brother lived to see him do this, then they'd have never been able to remove the smile from Hoster's face, never been able to stop him laughing. As he struggled to act the lord he was pretending to be, as he struggled to keep a jovial outlook, if not attitude, he hoped they'd be gone on the morrow. If they were not, then he may very well be. In the end, it took them more than a week to leave, and had it not been for a raven from Old Walder himself, then Brynden had no doubt they'd have stayed for as long as he would have to. With that headache gone, he moved on to the next ones, the first being coin. He was surprised by just how much of it they'd spent, just how much it cost to run the keep. "These figures are right, master," he said, asking Vyman. "They are, my lord. That's last year's expenditure." "Why is so much higher than the year before?" he asked, looking at the 2 figures. "We had more problems to deal with last year, my lord. Some one-off events." The maester said, and he nodded, though found the answer unsatisfying. "The stores, maester," he said, changing the subject. "We have enough for 3 moons, my lord," the maester said, and he looked at him stunned. They had always kept 2 years' worth of stores in the keep, both for the winters, and should they ever find themselves besieged, so for them to have only 3 months was unbelievable to him. "We must order more, maester. How come we have so little?" Lord Yaxley felt we were spending excessively on the stocks, my lord. "Order more, maester, more flour, and more grain. Do it now. I want at least a year's worth by the time my nephew returns." "As you say, my lord," the maester said, leaving. He shook his head. His nephew really was an idiot. He doubted there was a keep in the Riverlands who carried less stores than Riverrun. Had their bannermen known of this, then they'd fall even lower in their favor. He began to look around the keep even more over the next few days. The defenses that he'd once been so proud of, that he once bragged to Jon about, seemed to be missing, or worse, in disrepair. He watched their guards work, watched their training, and once again, it was below standard. It was, in fact, incredibly substandard, and it bothered him greatly. Hoster was a military man. He had led men, he had fought in battles, he knew how to prepare men to fight. Was he really this lax? Asking around, he found the same answer he had with the stores. Hoster, it seemed, had passed responsibility for this to Edmure too, and so Brynden resolved to fix this also. "Sir Robin, Sir Desmond," he said, offering both men a drink, as they walked into the solar. Once they'd sat and took their wine, he looked at them. "I wish to speak about the guard, sirs." After scheduling extra training sessions, after finding out that once again coin had been moved from Sir Desmond's arms and defense budget, from Sir Robin's horses, he called for the steward to explain. Other D's Wayne had been steward even when he was living here, and Brynden liked and respected the man, but he seemed to have been lax in his duties, and that needed to stop, or he needed to be replaced. "I'm very disappointed, Utherades. Riverrun is not what I expected. Stores, arms, defenses, all of it is lacking. As I told your brother on many occasions, my lord," the steward said, catching him by surprise. "You did? More times than I care to remember, my lord." "And my brother didn't address it?" he asked. "He asked Lord Yaxmere to do so, my lord. I found mine own duties limited after. Limited how? Maester Vyman and Lord Edmure assumed most of my duties. My lord, I've been relegated to dealing with the household staff, rather than the household itself, the old steward said bitterly. I shall speak to my nephew upon his return. Uther, ye and the master have not been doing a good job, he said, and the steward got up to leave before turning. It is good you are here, my lord, the man said, smiling at him as he left the room. Was it though? Did he need this headache? Did he want this headache? Was there enough ale to get rid of this headache? Concentrating on the last of them, he resolved to get very drunk that night, something which he did. Waking the next morning, he was pleased to see the guards already up and sparring, to see and hear the sound of the hammer striking the anvil in the smiths. He breathed the fresh air and went to break his fast. Surprised he had no hangover. Over the next few weeks, he alternated between hearing petitions, settling disputes, and making sure the orders he gave were carried out. The defenses, the drills, the stores, all of it he was pleased to see being taken care of, which left him then with time to finally begin to see if he could find the evidence he had actually stayed here for, to see if the snakes in his gut belonged there or not. Are these all of my brother's private notes? He asked the Maester. They are, my lord. He read through them and found nothing. Not a thing to either allay his fears or reinforce them. Just simple notations, talk of bannermen, talk of potential brides for Edmure. Nothing personal, nothing to show what his brother may have had in his mind. Nothing to show any link between his death and his nephew. It was at dinner that night, sitting beside Utherades, the hall for once empty of any but river-run people, that he found out anything that could be helpful. Your brother kept a journal, my lord, kept it in a wall in his privy, the steward said. His privy, he asked, said he. Did his best thinking in there, my lord, the steward said, and Brynden couldn't help but laugh. Who knew of this? He asked. I don't know, my lord. He found to his dismay. It was gone when he looked. The wall where it had been placed in had been rebuilt very recently, as if someone had been looking for it before him. Shaking his head, he continued to look and finally found some notes hidden under a board. Reading through them, he was surprised at what they suggested. Letters, drafts, asking Ned Stark to allow young Brandon Ward with them, suggesting a future for the lad, an important one. When Edmure returned alone, he was surprised. He had expected Catelyn to join him. When his nephew told him of Sansa's betrothal, he shook his head. Surely they couldn't so, without Ned's permission, but being called to his nephew's solar the next morning, he had put those thoughts out of his head. Instead, wondering what this was all about, he wouldn't have longed to wait to find out. A few days later, would you like another drink, sire? The woman asked as he sat in the crossroads, and more than a week later. Aye, he said, his mood still not improved. After finishing his ale, breaking his fast, he left and mounted his horse, ready to ride home to go back to people who actually respected him, people who valued him. He looked at the road in front of him, east to the Eyrie. Less than a week, and he'd be home, and yet it was north he faced, and north he rode. It was time he met his grandnephew. Perhaps there was still some family worth his time. Brynden thought, hopefully. The North 2094 AC. Ned Stark. He had looked forward to being home for days. Ever since the weather turned, ever since the rains had started, sheltering in the woods with his men in the wet was not something he enjoyed. He wished to see his children, to eat in his hall, enjoy one of Gage's pies, a warm bath, and some ice-cooled ale. Seeing the walls in front of him, he smiled. They had made it before dark. The old gods had blessed him once again. He looked down at Leia, seeing her almost look as eager to be home as he was. No doubt, reaching down, he rubbed his hand on her neck, barely having to lean down from his horse to do so. Come on, girl, let's go home, he said as they rode through the gates. Once inside, Leia immediately took off to see her pups while he dismounted when he saw his steward and some of his men waiting to speak to him. My lord, it's good to see you well, Theon said, and Ned was happy to see his steward, though he wondered where Sir Roderick was. Sir Roderick, he asked, giving voice to the thought, is organizing the men for the next search party. Search party? He asked, confused. Theon Greyjoy, my lord. He escaped. We've been looking for him for days. What? He said. Where is Sir Roderick? He was directed to the guards' hall, and found the knight speaking to some of his guards. Seeing him, though, Sir Roderick began to speak to him instead. My lord, I didn't expect you back today, Roderick said, and he waved it off, more eager to know what had happened, to find out how Theon Greyjoy had managed to escape. When he got told the details, he was furious. Not at his guards, he knew Sir Roderick would deal with them, but more himself. He should have been more stringent, More guards, too. What was he thinking? He looked at the sky, seeing it grow darker. There was no point in doing anything until the morrow at the earliest, so instead he walked into the keep to speak to his children. Arya, Bran, and Janelle were sitting at the table. He arrived after dinner, it seemed, looking at them, welcoming Lodia home. Watching on as she rolled around the ground with Nymeria and Summer, he felt almost content. It took a few moments for them to realize, it seemed, that he was home too. But when they did, both his children looked up as Janelle pointed him out. "Father," Arya said, running her smiling face, a welcome sight. "Father," Bran said, even more excitedly as he ran behind his sister. Grabbing his daughter in his arms and swinging her around, he felt Bran grab his legs and so leaned down to lift him up to do the same, both children's laughter sounding out around the hall. He walked carrying them both to the table, seeing Janelle smile at him. He put them down on the seats and took a seat himself. "Lord Stark, it's good to see you home safe and well," Janelle said, and he nodded. "Aye, it's good to be home. Jon and it's Ned. These two give you much trouble," he said, mussing Bran's hair when Arya dodged his hand. "No, Ned, they both behaved well. Both have been diligent in their lessons, too," she said, smiling, and Arya looked to him. "I've got even better with my bow, Father. I've been hitting the targets even more, haven't I, Al?" Erdier said, smiling, when the woman agreed with her. "And you, Bran?" "I'm trying, Father," Bran said, and he mussed his hair, making him laugh once again. He decided to eat now and take his bath later, not wishing to miss out on this time with his children, especially given he'd be leaving again on the morrow. Arya never stopped talking, telling him of Janelle, she called her, should he wondered, listening on as Arya began telling him of how El showed her how the old gods saw them through the weirwoods, how they listened when she spoke, of how the eyes on the tree were always watching. Ned was grateful the children were learning of such things, grateful that, like him, they learned the tales of the true North. Eld, it seemed, was a natural storyteller, and his children enjoyed listening to her. After finishing his meal, he helped them to bed, and before he went to take his bath, he spoke to Eld to tell her he'd need to leave on the morrow. "Do you have to go, Ned?" she asked, and he appreciated the concern in her voice. "Aye, he's a hostage, El," he said, and noticed her smile when he called her that. "If I don't find him, I need to tell the crown. He's escaped. I must find him." "The children, when will you leave?" she asked. "Early on the morrow. Break your fast with them, Ned. They'll wish to speak to you, and should you be gone when they rise, they'll be hurt by it." He nodded at her, bid her good night, and went to take his bath, feeling the sheer relief the hot water gave his weary bones. His sleep that night was tormented, at first by the thoughts that Theon Greyjoy had escaped, that he had lost a hostage. The dishonor of it, the embarrassment of it, causing him distress. Then his dreams changed into thoughts of his wife, of the letters he'd read, and then of seeing him leave the children alone as he rode off. Waking the next morning, he dressed, and broke his fast early. The children upset by the fact he was leaving yet again, though Arya happy he was going to capture the squid, as she called Theon. As he bid them all farewell and rode out the gate, he looked back to see El holding his children's hands, to see that though they were upset he was leaving, they were not being left alone. He was happy at that, though a part of his mind wouldn't let him forget that it was their mother who should be with them. "Come, my lord, we have a squid to catch," Jerry Cassell said, and Ned looked down to Lash. "Find him for me, girl," he said, and the wolf raced off ahead of them. For almost a moon they searched, riding east towards the stony shore, as that was the direction Lancia brought them in. Jory told him he'd gone south as far as Saren and the Barrowlands, and found nothing, while others had gone west towards Hornwood, all with no sign. A week into their search, they'd found some abandoned clothing, and Frost led them to a horse trail. But since then, not a sign. Not seeing the sea in front of them, he wondered if they'd missed him. Had he managed to escape? Had he made it to the sea and tried to sail home? Was he that much on an idiot? The truth was Ned wasn't sure he was not. Wasn't sure it wouldn't be the idea an Ironborn may come up with. Head for the sea and sail, even though you knew not what you were doing. "My lord, look," Jory said, and he pointed at Laia, racing ahead of them. "Let's follow, she looks like she's got the scent of something," he said, and he and his men rode forward. They found an old shack, a horse outside, and inside an old man, bruised and battered, but recovering from his wounds. Luziai stood on the seashore, looking out at the water before turning to look back at him, as if to say, "There, he went there," which it turned out may very well be the truth. The man had been attacked most likely by Theon, and he had his small boat stolen. After giving him a few coins, Ned called the search off and headed home. It was no use. Theon was gone. Arriving home moon later, he was surprised to see a group of carts arriving at Wintertown. Even more so to see Luwin directing them to a building. Looking at the master, he called him over. "My lord, you have returned." "Aye, who are they?" "Some men and women from Lord Bolton's lands. They picked up some more from Hornwood. They heard what we're planning here, and so moved their belongings to stay here permanently, rather than just for winter," Luwin said proudly as their plans were bearing fruit. "Is there anything else I should know?" "Some ravens arrived for you, my lord. I placed them on your desk. I'll come back with you." "No, help them settle in. We'll speak later, maester." "As you say, my lord," Luwin said as he turned to show more people to the large building they used. Riding home, Ned wondered as much about the ravens which had arrived as the one he would soon have to send to Robert. Having to tell the king that he'd lost the hostage he'd been ordered to keep was something he wasn't looking forward to. He knew Robert would rant and rave over it. But as he rode through the gates, as he saw Elle and his children standing there waiting for him, their 2 wolves by their side, he found he didn't really care. Casterly Rock 2094 AC. Jaime. Jon fought like a demon, moving faster and faster than he had ever seen him, almost as if he was putting every single ounce of concentration into the fight, almost as if he was trying to fight something unseen. That and the lack of banter, the lack of talk, the fact that he had asked both Arthur and Walder to stay away, all of it was making the hairs on his neck rise. He dodged a blow that had far more power in it than Jon's usually did, before moving back and blocking one just as powerful. While his speed and his power were both at levels he'd not expected, his technique was suffering, his blows not as precise as they should be. The swordsman and Jaime wanted nothing more than to hone this, to incorporate this into Jon's style. With this speed, with this power available, he'd be a far bigger threat. But the man in him, the one who cared about Jon, not as king, not the swordsman he'd become, but Jon, worried for him, there was something wrong and fighting wasn't clearing it up. So he allowed Jon to move forward, and then he in 2 moves disarmed him, much to Jon's shock, seeing him bend down to pick the sword up. To begin again, he shook his head. "No, Jon, I want to go again," Jon said. "No, whatever it is in your head, whatever it is that's bothering you, this isn't helping," he said, and noticed how Jon looked at him, his eyes glancing at his and then quickly looking back again. "Aye, it won't," Jon said a moment later, and the look on his face almost crushed him. He looked lost. "Jon, what is it? Talk to me, please," he said, his voice almost pleading. Jaime, can we go for a ride?" "Will you talk to me then?" he asked, and Jon nodded. Once again he was surprised when Jon asked Arthur and Walder to stay back, though this time Arthur was having none of it. The Sword of the Morning refusing to allow his king ride out without him, not even having Ghost with him, was enough to persuade Arthur, and Jon arguing with him had no effect whatsoever. So finally, after Arthur agreed that he and Walder would give them space when they asked, they set off. Jaime recognized the route. Jon had shown him this place, told him Joy had found it, and Jaime had brought Daisy there one evening to watch the sun fall and see the gold change color. Casterly Rock, taking on a red hue rather than the golden one, it usually did as the sun shined on it. When they reached the hill, Jon had Arthur and Walder wait with the horses. Walder's destrier making their own look like ponies beside him. "Here, Jaime," Jon said as he sat down, and had he been less worried about what was on his king's mind, he'd have noticed he hadn't called him Lord once. They sat there in silence. Jaime given Jon as much time as he could to gather his thoughts, each moment stretching on, before finally Jon began to speak. "I know I've been acting odd these last few days. I've seen how everyone looks at me, and I understand their concern, but I've had a lot on my mind, a lot to work through, and it's taken me time to realize that as much as I'd like to keep this to myself, I cannot." Jaime looked to him and saw he was crying. He wanted to say something, but before he could, Jon continued speaking. "If there was any way I could hide it, a way I could deny it, I would. I want you to know that. I need you to know that. But when Tyrion gets back, it's going to be clear. Questions are going to be asked, and I can't sit there knowing the truth and lie not to him and not to you, never to you." "Jon, what it is," he said as Jon wiped his eyes. "Look, Aren, I found out who his rider is. It's Tyrion." Jon said softly, Tyrion, that made no sense. How could Tyrion ride a dragon? Only Targaryens could ride dragons. He looked to Jon, saw the concern in his eyes, and it took him some time to realize it. Some time to gather his thoughts and see what Jon was so concerned about. "I saw it, Jaime. I saw it myself. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Jaime jumped to his feet, dislodging Jon's arm from his shoulder. He began to walk up and down, shaking his head. It couldn't be. It can't be. He was his brother. He was his brother. It couldn't be true. How? He asked, the one question clear in his head. Gods, no. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. He fell to his knees. The roar he let out could probably be heard in Casterly Rock. The pain in his heart, unlike any he could ever remember. He saw her face, her hair, her smile. Then he saw him, the scabs on his arms, the long nails scratching and picking at them. He heard the screams, the sounds from the room. Leaning forward, he threw up. His stomach empty. He dry heaved again and shook his head repeatedly. He didn't feel Jon's hand on his back, nor see Arthur and Walder run up the hill, only to be waved away. Instead, he saw a broken queen, saw the looks she gave him, the pleading looks. He saw his brothers, saw them denying him the chance to do what needed to be done. Looking back to the queen, he saw her face change, her silver hair turning to gold, her indigo eyes turning to green, and he jumped to his feet. I should have made him suffer. I should have killed him slowly. I should have killed him the first time I saw him, he shouted, his own tears falling now. I'm sorry, Jaime, I'm so sorry, Jon said, standing to one side, looking at him, but almost afraid to come close. Tyrion, you can't tell him. He can't know this. Jon, he can't know this, he said, and Jon looked at him. He has to, Jaime. He has to. Jon said, and he looked at him angrily, almost disgustedly, before walking away from him. Jaime stormed down the hill. When Arthur moved to stop him, to ask him if he was all right, all Jaime saw was a white cloak. The punch he caught him with sent his former brother rolling down the hill. Walder moved forward, and Jaime readied another before the giant stood out of his way. Walking down, he quickly mounted Honor and rode off. How long he rode for, he couldn't tell. Where he wasn't sure. The stream was in front of him, and he led Honor to it. Dismounting, he began drinking and throwing water on his face. His reflection in the water changed from his to his mother's to his brother, to finally Aerys laughing like the madman he was. Jaime began to punch the water, only stopping when the White Wolf dragged him away. He found them waiting for him a mile or so away. Jon almost slumped as badly as he was in the saddle. Arthur with a bruise on his cheekbone and Walder behind his king. He didn't speak, he barely looked at any of them other than Jon, before turning to ride back to Casterly Rock. Once there, he took the lift alone, leaving them to deal with Honor. He headed straight to his room. Seeing his wife there, he grabbed her in his arms and began to sob. The North 29-4 AC. Sir Richard Lonmouth. He had met Bronn and sent him on his way. The man keen to go to the west, even though he knew he would need to stay there for some time. He had been paid well, but he had no doubt his king and others would see to it that he got better rewarded, though it would take a lot more service for him to get the reward he truly wished for. Do you think they'll give me a castle? Bronn asked,